All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to class. As I told you, I'm not going to be able to be with you live in class, so I'm recording this lecture for your benefit so that you can watch it later and still have the benefit of the lecture. Now, we are still going through our textbook, and we are in Chapter 10. So please, if you want to follow along, you can get to the PDF of your textbook and track with me. So Chapter 10 is members and leaders in small group communication. So let me highlight some really important features here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. Let's see. Share my screen. And get my presentation going here. All right, so Chapter 10, members and leaders in small group communication. We've been talking about group communication. Now we're talking about leadership roles and obviously other roles, meaning members of the group. So that's what this chapter is really about. We have three main learning objectives. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to describe and give the examples of the different types of group members that are out there. Then we're going to look at leadership and define some of the theories of leadership and kind of look at some of the important leadership skills that are out there. And then the third part is we're going to look at the role that the culture plays and how those differences make a difference, sort of say, when you have leaders coming from cultures that are high and low power cultures or collectivistic or individualistic cultures. So we'll consider the component of culture very briefly, but mostly we will focus on the idea of group membership and leadership skills and how it all works together in small groups. Okay, so members in a small group communication. We're going to look at the examples of three different types of group members. So first of all, we have to say that as we approach the whole idea of being a part of a group, we have to recognize that each one of us who participates in a group has specific roles. There are roles that we play. And much of this chapter, by the way, will in major ways perhaps will help people who are studying business or think in the context of business, because much of this particular communication interaction that happens in groups is usually applies to business. Now, it can apply to other settings, like, for example, family or school. But for the most part, a lot of the examples, a lot of the things that this textbook talks about really apply to business environment, okay? So we do have different types of group members, and they usually fall into three general classes. The first one is a group task roles. The first one is group task roles. The second one is group building and maintenance roles. And then there's individual roles. So there's all these different roles that we play, but these are the categories into which our roles fall. Basically, as members of a group or a team, when we're working on a collaborative task or something like that, we tend to usually fall into one of those roles, a lot of times into multiple roles, depending on the situation and the dynamics of the group. So let me unfold these specific roles for you and see if you recognize yourself or somebody else in those particular roles. So the first one that I mentioned is group task roles. This is a person who takes on this, usually helps the group to focus on achieving goals, and the examples of such roles would be information seeker. This would be a person who in a group setting would try to ask questions that would lead the group to collaboratively figure out more ideas, come up with more information. This would be a person who would prompt to ask questions. Well, what about this? And what about that? And what do we know about this? So it's a person who kind of guides the group in a very gently way in discovering more information and filling in some of the gaps. The other task role that people often take on is initiator contributor. So this is a person who would kind of take the initiative into their hands and contribute to the group by offering what they have, what they know, and state, sort of say, their expertise on the topic. Then there's the elaborator. The elaborator is a person who explains everything to everyone. Essentially, they will take a point. They're not making a point themselves. They're not coming up with an idea, but they will elaborate on this idea and kind of chew on it out loud and try to take it apart into bits and pieces and define some of the more finer points of the idea, even if they did not come up with the ideas themselves. Then there's usually an evaluator critic. This is a person who will look at this and say, I don't know about this. Maybe this is good. Maybe this is bad. This will work. This will not work. So sometimes a person who feels it is their job to somehow evaluate things that happen in the group. And sometimes they'll be critical. Sometimes they will not be critical. Sometimes they will be right. And other times they will be wrong. And then there's the procedural technician. This is the person who will kind of prod the group along and lead them and say, okay, we did this. Now we need to do that. It's a person that will kind of provide structure to the group. Okay, we need to move on to that agenda or move on to this agenda. So different people will take on these different roles within the group. And so this first category just addresses the group task roles. This has to do with what needs to be done within the group, okay? Now, there are some group roles that people play that are called group building and maintenance roles. Now, these are the people within a large group that usually nourish the relationships among their members so that the group can function effectively. So what does that mean? Well, one of the roles that people play is an encourager or harmonizer. So basically, this would be the person who would say, way to go, this is a great idea. Oh, thanks for offering that. That was really helpful. So that we kind of like encouraging people, giving them praise at certain times, affirming them. Also, this would be a person who would seek to harmonize, where they would say, okay, well, so-and-so had this idea and this person had this idea, well, maybe they can work together or something like that. Then there's a person who is called a compromiser. So whenever a contrasting ideas come up, ideas that seem to not agree, when there's different opinions within the group, I should do it this way. Well, we know we should do it this way. And so there's a person who seeks compromise. Maybe we can do this and this. So that is usually a person who tries to nurture and build up the group. They don't want it to fall apart. They don't want the negative feelings to happen. So they find some kind of a middle road compromise. Then there's the gatekeeper expediter, and that's a person who usually moves things along, or basically says, all right, we need to stay on task, we need to focus, and make sure that anybody that perhaps is mean to somebody in the group, they protect them, but at the same time, they move the group along in a more productive direction. Because if at some point the group is starting to be not productive, then this is the person who kind of moves everybody along. There's a standard setter, and that's usually is a person who basically decides to figure out what are the minimum requirements that we must reach and what are some of the other goals that we must achieve. And then there's a follower. A follower is typically a passive person within a group who just wants to go along with everything else that everybody else does. They don't usually make noise. They don't usually say much. They just kind of nod and go along with everybody else taking a part in a group. Now, we talked about those group roles that are nurturing and kind of affirming and building up. Now, there are also individual roles. Now, individual roles are a little bit more problematic because group roles try to find a balance and fit into the group. But the individual roles tend to hinder the group from achieving the goals because they're not group oriented. So one of the individual roles, that people can take on is the aggressor. It's a person who basically pushes other people around in the group. Okay, the person who expresses their opinion over others, who kind of takes over, and so they take away from the group dynamic, and they don't allow other people's ideas to be voiced or developed. Then there's a recognition seeker and self-confessor. This is a person who usually likes to be recognized for what they did, so they will say things like, well, I did this and this and this in last year, and I did that and then me and so designed this particular model or did that. And so these are the people who would be trying to affirm themselves rather than the group, and kind of tooting their own horn and looking for recognition for their past achievements. Then there's one called blocker. Now, blocker is a little bit different. He's the person who basically gives a very negative feedback. Anything that anybody says, they say, well, that will not work. That's not going to happen. That's, basically, it's a person who will block the progress. They find fault with everything. Special interest leader is a person who says, well, yeah, that was a great idea, but it doesn't meet the needs of such and such group or this and that cause. And so they really care about this one particular segment, and they're going to push that one segment all the time. And then there's the dominator. A dominator is the person who usually says, I'm the boss, I'm in charge. I've been here the longest. I've been in this company for 25 years, and they just kind of try to take over the process. Again, not a group-focused role. All of these roles are called individual roles because they push the individuality and they push aside the group dynamic by simply pushing themselves into a position of power or authority or assessment of some sort, or somebody who's trying to sort of say usurp a leadership role that may not be actually theirs. So as we look at these dynamics in these groups, there are some skills that the textbook authors offer us. And these skills are, quite important if you can grab onto them. Because if you are a member in the group, now, we're going to talk about leadership, and that's a separate story. But just being a member, just being a part of a group, if you have to work within a group, if you have to collaborate with other people, then do be group oriented rather than being oriented towards self. Think about other people, affirm other people, help them work within the group, find compromises, sort of say, but work as a team member rather than work as an individual, basically, and present yourself. Center conflict on issues. This is really important. A lot of times in group dynamic, people tend to focus on individual personalities. They don't like somebody, so because so-and-so voiced their opinion on such a particular matter, they're going to attack them personally. It's absolutely fine in the group dynamic to say, I don't like this idea, I don't agree, but it's not personal. Okay, you're disagreeing with an issue, you're disagreeing with a topic, you're disagreeing with a method, you're not disagreeing with the person. It's not personal, essentially. And so making things not personal, the center of the conflict is issue, not a person. It's not because so-and-so presented it, it's because the idea they presented is really not good or short-sighted or something like that. And so don't speak to the person, speak to the idea or the issue, and that will basically keep a better dynamic of the group. Now, be critically open-minded. Being closed-minded is a problem. A lot of people have already made up their mind before you give them an idea. Why? Because they have an idea of their own. There's a way they like to do things, and they don't want to do it another way. So being open-minded includes allowing other possibilities, allowing other ways of doing the task or something like that. But don't just be open-minded. Just because somebody presents an alternative or an idea doesn't mean that it's good. Be critically open-minded. Do work through that issue. Do work through that proposal, and be a little bit sort of say critical about it. See if it can withstand the pressure, essentially, or will this method or idea fall apart once any amount of pressure is applied to it. So that's what it means to be critically open-minded. Now, be aware of social loafing. There's this concept of social loafing out there that really has to do with people believe that in a group, they don't have to pull their weight, that somehow the group gets it all done and they don't have to work as hard and it's all going to happen anyway. They're not going to get recognition because they're part of the group. They're not working on their own. So, and they don't have to work as hard. Everything's going to get done anyway. Somebody else will pick up the pieces and get it all done. So beware of that problem. You cannot be that type of a person in a group, because too many people like that, and then the group will have a terrible dynamic and people get stressed out. Ensure understanding. Whenever you're working within the group as a member, make sure that people actually understand what you're saying. Sometimes people do not express themselves clearly enough. And a good way of making sure that people understand you is to ask questions. Does this make sense? Do you understand what I mean? Because sometimes we think people understand us because maybe we're excited about something, or maybe we're going into an area that not everybody is very strong in. Maybe they don't know this topic very well. So ask questions, make sure that there's understanding, because if people don't understand you and then reject your ideas, well, they reject your ideas because they didn't understand you, not because your ideas were bad or anything like that. So if you're problem solving in a group, make sure that people actually understand what it is that you're proposing. And then another member skill that's very, very useful is beware of the group think. What in the world is a groupthink? Groupthink is a way of thinking that is indicative of small groups typically. Sometimes tight-knit communities and groups and people that work together tend to come up with a way of doing things, and they are very closed-minded. This is like they think this is the way, and because everybody else agrees with them, they go along and they will never change. So groupthink is basically a common collaborative mentality where people simply accept the status quo. They accept what everybody else thinks and go along with it without ever challenging it, without ever allowing a possibility of something else being an option. So groupthink is a problem. It's a very closed-minded type of engagement. So be aware of that a group that works really closely together can become very close-minded because they only know so much and they will only let in certain amount of information. They will not go out of that box and learn something new or discover something they haven't used before. So that is a very, very negative process. So if you're aware of that, then you can avoid it. So those are some of the really helpful member skills that the textbook offers us as an advice. That's pretty much, covers the textbook up to page, I believe, 197. 197, 198. Those are all, important issues, but I think we've covered them sufficiently. And, feel free to read your textbook. Obviously, I'm not going to cover every little bit and pieces. I'm doing it in a summary style. So let's move into the leadership definition. So we talked about what it means to be a good member of a group. Now we're going to talk about leadership. What is leadership? What are leaders like? What qualities are they supposed to have? Now, leadership is defined in two very different ways. According to our textbook, there's two aspects of the leadership definition. First is leadership is the process of influencing the thoughts and feelings and behaviors of group members and establishing the direction that others follow. Leadership and influence are parts of the same skill. So leadership is influence. That's one of the way of saying setting the direction, moving people along in a particular flow of things. That's leadership. Now, the other definition of leadership is that leadership is the process of empowering others. So the leader is the person who helps others to maximize their potential and to take control of their lives. So the idea is this second part of a leader definition has to do with the leader really encouraging each individual person that they're working with to become the best in what they do, and helping them to become best by offering particular guidance or direction, or even teaching them or mentoring them in some way, shape, or form. But the idea is that they're not going to do it all themselves, and they're not going to do it for that person. They're going to help that person rise to the occasion and actually accomplish that task. So we got two aspects in this leadership definition, okay? And the two aspects is that leadership is influencing and leadership is empowering, okay? Influencing people is basically telling them what to do or setting the trend and making them follow. It's showing them how to do it, when to do it, and sort of say guiding them through the process. That's influencing them. And so people tend to follow those types of leaders. But then there's the empowerment side. It's both the influence and the empowerment is what makes really successful leaders. Most successful leaders combine both of those qualities. So influencing people and guiding them in this way, but also giving them the ability to actually finish the task, to work through the problems, work through the issues, not really giving them all the answers, even if you know all the answers, because the point is to help people grow and develop and grow in their own abilities. So it's interesting. Our textbook offers something. We're talking about leadership, and some of you may be tuning out this idea and saying, well, leadership, I'm not really a leader. I hear this all day long from people all the time. I'm not a leader. I'm just a member of the team. I am a follower. You know, people don't want to be leaders. And the reason why they don't want to be leaders or will not even try to be leaders and can't even imagine what it's like to be a leader, because they've convinced themselves that they can't be a leader. And so there are several myths that I wanted to address just to back up a little bit about leadership. One of the myths is that the skills of leadership are rare, that leaders are these exceptional people who only appear in certain places at certain times, and that they are extremely talented. And those are the people who you're going to find like at the highest tiers of big, huge companies and corporations or government or whatever. And people say, well, that's leadership. Everything else, not really. Well, it's a myth, because the skills of leadership are not that rare. And the reason is because the skills can be developed. People become leaders. Nobody is a leader from the moment they start to lead. Nobody's a leader from the moment they get a chance to lead. They learn those skills over a period of time. They hone them, they develop them, and it takes sometimes a lifetime to develop those skills. But other people come into it a little bit more naturally. But that doesn't mean that leader skills are so rare, and so exceptional. They're just like anything else. It's just skills. Anything can be learned. Now, another myth is that leaders are born. Some people believe that you have to be born a leader, that some people simply have it and other people don't. And the truth is, yes, there are some people who have greater propensity, greater abilities in certain areas, but that does not mean that somebody who is not naturally a leader, who wasn't born that way, who doesn't have those qualities that most of us see in the leaders, cannot develop those qualities. So yes, maybe some people have what it takes naturally. Maybe it's their character or something like that. But in reality, you're not born a leader. People grow into leadership, and that means it's a skill that can be developed. It can be taught, it can be learned, and it can grow. And then another myth is that leaders are always charismatic. Well, and the truth is, not all leaders are charismatic. Some of the greatest leaders in the world that you could see throughout history of time, some of them were charismatic and some of them were not. Some of them dressed really sharply and looked handsome and were tall and muscular and all of that. Others were not at all. Some were not that good looking. Some were overweight. Some were very bleak and not noticeable in a crowd. It really doesn't matter. We assume that people are these charismatic powerhouses or something like that, and everybody just follows them with the crowd. But the truth is that that's not true of leaders. That's not true of great leaders. There are many great leaders who do not possess those ideal qualities that we tend to assign and ascribe to them. So, that's just a word of encouragement for some of you who are saying, I'm not a leader. This does not apply to me. I have no idea, how to lead. I don't want to lead. The truth is, any one of us can learn how to be a leader if they're willing to, if they want to put their mind to it. If they want to grow in that area, they certainly can. It doesn't mean that you're going to be a great leader. It doesn't mean you're going to be trusted with leading, but you can be just a leader maybe within your own small group, and that is already leadership, maybe even within your own family. But these leadership skills can be learned, and they can be developed, which is what the point of this entire section of this chapter is, to look at some of these skills and to look at some of these trends and paradigms that we're talking about. So right now we're going to get into leadership theories. Let's see, that starts on page 199. Okay. So there are several leadership theories, meaning there are several ways in which we understand leadership works. Okay. One of them is called the traits approach. And that basically means that people who possess certain traits are leaders, and they lead. So people who have high integrity, for example, people who are sociable, people who have self-confidence, people who are very determined, they tend to lead. Why? Because those qualities, those traits, is what really makes them leaders. And that is one theory of how people explain why leaders are leaders and why certain people, take on those roles. That's called trait approach. Another one's called a functional approach, and it has to do with what people do when, say, a different situation occurs. So as something happens, certain people jump to solve the problem, okay? And they become leaders by the virtue of functioning as one. They're the problem solver. They're the one who's going to do something about it. And so by the virtue of their function, they become leaders and they lead. So the other one is called a transformational approach. In this situation, there are some leaders who are very strong in empowering someone else. They may not have all the skills and they may not know everything, but somehow they're able to inspire and to elevate others to achieve greater heights. And by giving them directions and by inspiring them, they are essentially transforming those other people who are working under them and under their guidance, under the directions. They may not be the most gifted individuals themselves, but their gift is to guide and to help others, achieve their potential and sometimes even overcome significant difficulties. So that's called transformational approach. So some people are leaders because they help others transform and change and become better. So they're recognized as leaders immediately because of that feature of their contribution. And then there's another approach, and this one we're going to actually break down a little bit more, is called situational approach. Situational approach is really reflects on leadership that changes depending on the need. There are different things that happen in an environment of a group that is working together. And the leaders are basically switching between different styles of leadership depending on the need. One style is the telling style. That's where a person basically tells everybody what to do. They're knowledgeable, they understand the problem, and they know what needs to happen, and so they tell everybody what to do, even though they themselves cannot solve the problem, and by themselves they cannot resolve the issue, but at least they can give directions and tell everybody what to do, and that will get the job done. So that's called telling style of leadership. The other one is called selling style of leadership. This is the kind of leader that has to sell the group on doing the task, meaning the people have a task, they know what to do, and they probably know how to do it, but they're just not into it, and they have to realize why we're doing this. What is so important about what we're doing this? And so it's essentially it's a motivational role in many ways. The participating style is yet another style of leadership, and this particular style basically offers a lot of support to the group members, but it does so in participating. A group has lost willingness, the desire, the drive to complete a project. And so the leader jumps in and participates. So imagine of the people who are just kind of shoveling snow and they're tired, and after a while they're like, I can't do this anymore. So they just stand back and start talking and no longer shovel snow. So a leader will jump in, grab the shovel, and start shoveling snow. And by looking at that leader, they will stop their conversation and all of a sudden start shoveling snow too. So it's that idea that I'm going to jump into the action, I'll participate, and I'll motivate the group to complete the task by actually being a part of it. And then there's a delegating style. Delegating style is a completely different. This is where delegating style is where the leader knows what needs to be done, perhaps knows how to get it done, maybe, maybe not. But in the end, he basically divides the task between a bunch of different people and coordinates the effort. You do this, you do this, you do that, you do this, because you're good at this and I'm good at that, and everybody does their part, and then we put it all together and it works. And so delegating style is also an organizational style that basically allows to get the job done. And so some people recognize that this is one of the theories called the situational approach, that some of the best leaders are adept in switching between these styles, and they can be a leader in whatever situation there is. And that's why it's called the situational approach, because based on the situation, based on the need, they adapt their leadership style. And in the end, they get the job done, and they get the respect of the team and the whole group because they're effective in their leadership. So that's leadership theories for us. Now let's talk a little bit about the leadership skills. The textbook on page 201 talks about some of the important leadership skills that every leader should have. Now, as I said, maybe you say to yourself, I'm not a leader, this is not important for me. Trust me, you can learn. Every one of us can be a leader, even in a small way. And even if you're not, loud or assertive or charismatic or anything like that, these qualities can help you to be leaders in different environments. So what are some of these leadership skills? Well, first one that the textbook offers us is prepare members and start interaction. So that basically group does not work on itself. It doesn't start on its own. Somebody has to get it started. And somebody might have to make some preparations for people to get started, because when groups come together, a lot of times they're disorganized. Nobody knows who is doing what. So a simple thing of, putting together a plan and saying, all right, this is our plan, this is our agenda, all of a sudden you're starting moving people in the right direction, or saying, let's stop talking and start, focusing on something. So there has to be some sort of a direction that is given, and that's this interaction has to be started. Somebody has to start the meeting of it, essentially. Another leadership skill is to build group cohesiveness. There could be problems that will arise in the group. There could be differences of character. Some people are interested, other people are disinterested. Some people are prone to give advice and suggestions and voice their opinions, others are not. And so the leader recognizes these dynamics and tries to build group cohesiveness. The reader recognizes the conflicts between different members of the group, perhaps, or any animosity that might exist, and they just learn how to mediate that, essentially, by navigating between the different character traits of the different members of their group. Maintain effective interaction. There's a lot of interaction that happens, but not all interaction is effective. Effective interaction is the one that leads and guides people towards a goal. So asking the right questions, asking for feedback on an issue or problem that requires feedback at the right time, focusing on different people's expertise and asking their advice in the particular areas rather than listening to just anyone. Knowing the giftedness of your team and being able to turn to their specific strengths. That's effective interaction. Now, you can ask everybody what they think about a particular issue, or you can ask people who know this issue very, very well and help them focus their skills and just say, I want to know what are the two best things that you think we can do. And so here, let me ask you these three people, because these three people are most competent in this area and they understand the problem more than anybody else. So rather than me turning to the whole entire group and going through 15 different people and listening to 15 different opinions, where their opinions matter, but not as much as those other three people who know this topic very well. So again, there's effective, there's ineffective interaction. Now, guide members through the agreed on agenda. That's a great leadership skill. Basically, any meeting, any group that you work with, you usually have a plan. And you have to guide people through the plan by announcing certain milestones or setting certain goals or giving people directions. Okay, we're doing this, then next we're going to do that. So you have to guide people, because otherwise people get disorganized and they can trail off into all sorts of areas that are not necessary, that are not main issues. Like, okay, these are the issues we're talking about. I know you want to talk about something else, but that's not what we gathered here to talk about. So you want to talk about something else? Let's set the something else meeting another time. Right now, this is our agenda. This is our focus. That's what we're doing. Again, that's a great leadership skill who can focus the group, not ignore people, but focus. Ensure member satisfaction is another great leadership skill that recognizes that people have different levels of satisfaction. So based on who you are, based on your contribution level, you may feel completely dissatisfied being a part of the group because nobody ever listens to your opinion or something like that. So making sure that nobody's left out, motivating people to contribute, recognizing their contributions, and finding a place for every person to sort of say express their strength is what not just dismissing people and just kind of glossing them over. So that's a great skill. Empower group members. We've talked about empowerment, and what does that really look like? Well, basically raising people's self-esteem, telling them that they can do it. Do not find faults within, okay, this is not going to work because so-and-so messed it all up or something like that. Doesn't matter. All right, we messed it up. Doesn't matter. We can fix it. Who did it? Doesn't matter. Whose fault it is? Doesn't matter. That's empowering. Focus on the solution rather than on laying blame on somebody else. You can share some of your decision-making power with people, where basically, as you go through the options, empowering your group members and say, okay, so this is our problem. We have 3 possible solutions. What do you guys think is the best one? That's, you could say, as a group leader, you could say, out of these 3, I think this is the best one. And usually people will go along with you. But you can turn the power to them and say, we have these 3 possibilities. Which one do you guys think is the top one? You know, and so you're turning over the power, decision-making power, essentially to your group, which is a very kind of a democratic thing to do. And it usually tends to build people up because now they have ownership. Now they feel like they're responsible to help and make things happen. Let's see. Listening to people. Sometimes leaders do fail to listen. And this is part of the empowerment process, is to simply listen people out. Sometimes people have a bad idea or they think their idea is good, but they have a hard time expressing it. And sometimes we simply have to listen to them and they would feel better already by simply voicing it out. Even if their idea never gets picked, at least they got a chance to contribute and they were heard, versus they were just, you know, stop talking, go away. Interrupting is a problem, and so one of the ways of empowering is allowing people to finish their thoughts and their ideas and not cut to the chase and just, all right, let's move along. That's another important empowerment technique. So the next point is to encourage ongoing evaluation and improvement. No group is perfect. No group does everything right. So it's good for groups to evaluate how good are we doing, and then focus on how can we improve. Now, a good leader will always recognize that there is room for growth and will identify those areas of growth and will focus on at least improving one particular feature next time or something like that. So encourage evaluation and encourage improvement. Every leader should basically move in that direction, because that promotes the growth of the group. And that's part of the empowerment and elevating people. I know it sounds maybe counterintuitive, because in evaluation you discover faults and flaws, but that's not the point. Though you're not going to lay blame. You're just going to say, all right, we're going to become better at this. Managing conflict, next one. Managing conflict is inevitable. There's going to be group members who will argue, who will fight, who will disagree with each other, and who will make it personal. And so you have to have the wisdom and the skills of how to manage conflict and how to find ways to make peace within a group without necessarily acquiescing, without necessarily just giving up, sort of say, or giving in into whatever demands that usually the aggressive person would make. But still, you have to learn how to manage conflict. There's going to be conflict. And so we talked about conflict management in this book, and then there's some strategies that were given to us there. And then the next part, the final point here is mentoring. Being a mentor. Almost all great leaders are mentors. What does it mean to mentor somebody? To mentor somebody means to show them the skills that they need to have in order to do their job well. Somebody who's been doing a task for a long time usually has figured out a bunch of shortcuts, usually has figured out some of the better ways of doing something and not such a good ways of doing something. So being a mentor is guiding somebody who is new, somebody who hasn't done those things, in a very gentle way, and offering them some of the best practices, and perhaps explaining to them why you do things the way you do. But at the same time, you are giving them some good pointers as they grow. You're empowering them. You're giving them the ability to develop themselves. But at the same time, you're offering very specific advice and specific direction. And maybe instead of just telling them how to do this, offer them several options that will be helpful in them developing their own strategy for achieving a particular goal or a problem that they're trying to overcome. So, but anyway, mentoring, showing, sharing techniques and best practices, and helping people through work through their issues by using your own skill and experience is a leadership skill that a lot of great leaders possess. All right, so that is a lot of leadership skills that we talked about. So the last section of our class, and I know I'm going a little bit faster than I normally do, by the way. Sorry. Of course, my cell phone has to go off right now. The last section is to explain the role of culture and how culture works in these groups and how that affects things. Okay, so we have collectivistic cultures, we have individualistic cultures, and that will affect the way leadership works, because what we think of leadership a lot of times, I don't know about you, but of course, this book and a lot of the world that we are surrounded by, there are certain models of leadership that we embrace, and a lot of times they're very culturally driven. So this book is written from a perspective of Western culture, and a lot of the discussion that it talks about is also very business focused, very Western focused. But you have to realize that there are obviously cultures out there that are very different from Western culture, and culture plays a huge role in how people communicate, how people work in groups, how people treat leaders, and how people see themselves in the roles of being group members. So every culture that's out there, they have their own belief systems, they have their own way of life, and those belief systems, those value systems end up influencing the behavior of the members of the team and as well as the behavior of the leaders. So essentially, every culture has their own rules and their own preferences of what the style of leadership should be like and what the followers should be like. So, for example, in some cultures, you have leaders who are very authoritative, who are not democratic at all. So, for example, in the Western society, that style of leadership will not work, where people tell you, "Do what I told you just because I said so." Well, people might do it, but they will not be happy. So, a more democratic leader would actually explain why they want you to do such and such a thing because it does something, and give you the reasoning behind it. At least you feel like not you're just been told what to do, but you're being included in the process by explaining the rationale to you, for example. So some cultures are very top down, very authoritarian, and group members are actually not allowed to challenge anybody. Where in other cultures, you can have an employee ask a question of a boss. Well, in some environments, you ask a question of a boss, you're fired. I mean, you're not supposed to be asking questions. You're just supposed to be following orders. So these group dynamics are very different and very culture driven. A lot of that has to do with the style of leadership that the culture expects and the style of membership, group membership that the culture expects. So because cultures are so diverse and so different, we can't really say that this is the right way, this is the wrong way. So a lot of times, as I said, what we focus on in this textbook has to do with the Western style of leadership, because essentially this is an English language book, and welcome to America, sort of say this is the society that we're dealing with most of the time. But as people lead in different cultures, they lead differently, and they usually lead in consistency with whatever the strengths of their culture is, and they have to work within the dynamic. They can't actually be countercultural. So if people in other countries where culture is very different from US start leading in US style, it actually will not work at all. So you have to work within the culture rather than try to fight it. And that's really important to understand. Now, I wanted to discuss a little bit about individual and collective orientations. This is one of the major differences that you're going to see in leadership and in group membership dynamics. In an individualistic culture, you are responsible for your own conscience, for your own responsibility, and this is an individual matter. You are in charge of your life. You're in charge of your decisions. If you messed up, it's your fault. If you succeeded, it's your reward. It's all about you. That's individualistic culture. Now, in collectivistic culture, you're responsible to the rules of the social group, and members share their responsibility. They do that for accomplishments. They do this for failures. This is very different. So, for example, in the West, when somebody did something great, they will be praised publicly in front of everybody else. They'll be given an award. They will given recognition. They'll be given a bonus, a raise, or whatever. And basically, they will be recognized for their achievement. And why? Because they went out of their way to do something. Now, did they do it all by themselves? Probably not. Did they have some help? Yes. But they're the ones who kind of drove that and made it happen. So but they'll be recognized for that. Now, in collectivistic culture, that's not going to happen. In collectivistic culture, whatever accomplishment you made is great for the company. It's great for everybody else. Everybody gets a bonus. Everybody gets a raise. You don't get singled out because you solved the problem. You don't get rewarded because you're the best of the team. No, the whole team shares the credit and the accomplishments. And the same thing happens with failures. If somebody really messed up, something really made a terrible mistake, that one person is not going to be blamed for that one mistake. The blame's going to fall on the whole group. And again, that's a major difference between individualistic and collectivistic cultures. And that's going to hold true in many, many areas and of business or life in general. So you could see how that will affect your leadership style And you could see how that would affect your membership as far as being a member of a group. That really changes the dynamics quite a bit. Now, another important feature to mention is the high and low power distances. There are some cultures that have the high power distance, and that means the power is concentrated in the hands of very few people, and there's a huge difference between people who hold the power and people who do not, the ordinary citizen. So only a handful of people basically are super wealthy, super rich, super influential. They have everything, and they can control everything. And the massive amount of people do not have much, and they kind of depend on the benevolence of these few individuals who guide everybody and show everybody the way. So, and high power distance cultures, usually this is where people are called by huge fancy titles, and they're given all sorts of honors and respect, and nobody ever speaks against them or anything like that. So they usually have absolutely unchecked and almost unlimited authority and power, and they may fight and feud between themselves, but for the most part, nobody from the lower classes will ever challenge them because they'll just lose. They'll be squished in this environment. So that's high power distance cultures. And some cultures just tend to favor hierarchy. And so where you have like levels of importance, and so wherever you fall on a level of importance, you don't stick out beyond your level of importance. And then there's the low power distance cultures, where power is more evenly distributed among the people. So imagine having a meeting and some sort of a collaborative project in a high power distance culture. Will you be willing to communicate your ideas if you don't think the boss already likes them? Will you be even brave enough to even voice a concern or a question or raise an issue? Probably not, because you would feel the fear of retribution. You would feel that it's inappropriate to do so. This person is important and big and wealthy, and they got there, because of their talents and abilities. Who are you to tell them what to do, or even suggest that you have some other better way? So in a high power distance, this sort of say collaborative effort will be not very useful. But in the low power distance cultures, people feel that they're all contributing to something much bigger. They're all a part of it. No matter what their position in the company, they all feel like they're doing a job and they're contributing to the better working of a company. So they will offer advice. They will offer their perspective on a number of matters and problems. And that's going to be welcomed, and nobody's actually going to punish them for that, because they will be recognized as trying to help rather than hurt the company or organization or the group that they're part of. So once again, low power and high power distances, you could see how in communication, that's going to be a huge problem. In leadership, that's going to also alter things significantly. And I'm not trying to say that high power distance or low power distance is the right or the wrong. Again, when we speak about culture, we never make judgments. We don't just say this is the right culture, that's the wrong culture. Culture is culture. It is what it is, and we simply accept it for what it is and learn how to live with it. And so we can make value judgments, but only in a limited way. And it's not always fair for us to make those value judgments, because a lot of times when we do make value judgments, they're based on our preferences of our culture that we see through our own perspective of right and wrong and correct and incorrect. So, and that may not be entirely true either, because we are working from our cultural bias. Okay, so that's high and low power distances. So you could see how they will essentially affect your communication in the group, affect leadership, affect group membership, and the dynamics of those relationships. So you could see that not everything that I have shared in this chapter will actually apply to some of the extremes of those cultural differences that I've just expressed. All right, so that gets us to the end of our chapter. So we're up to the summary task. So I'm going to stop sharing now and go back to my main screen here. All right, so here we are, ladies and gentlemen. That was my summary of the chapter. Hopefully it's helpful to you. Please don't forget your exercise. You do have an exercise due this week, so go to the week number 10, and please see that exercise that needs to be completed. The directions are there. Download them, and then complete it and upload it to the Dropbox. I hope all is well, and thanks for your attention.